Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Futureproof podcast. As you know, during this podcast, I speak with well-renowned automotive executives that have been through transformations and improved organizations. And today I'm very excited to introduce Axel Maschka, an executive that has worked in many different cultures in many different countries and achieved many things. So I'll pass over to you, Axel, to introduce yourself.
Hey, Taylor, thank you. I'm excited to be here with you today. Yes, indeed, I had the chance in my almost 30 years to see some broad spectrum of leading OEMs and leading suppliers. I think by now, including MOBIS, I've worked with 4 out of the top 10 suppliers intensively for many years. I've worked with 2 premium OEMs, Daimler and Volvo, both on cars and truck side. So I would guess I have a pretty unique understanding about how this industry works from different cultures, different countries, and different angles. And I'm happy to share some of this experience here with you all tonight. Briefly in the sequence, Daimler, then I was 3 years in consulting with Booz Allen and Hamilton. Then I joined Bosch for many, many years. This was a marking experience. So bottom of my heart, I'm a Boschler in many ways, how to run the business. I've been in Conti VDO when we just acquired VDO from Siemens. I have been on my own, independent, having my own company for several years. I've been in Volvo, indeed, on purchasing side, sitting on the other side of the table, which is very enriching to see the spectrum also from the purchasing, these constraints from the manufacturer side. This helps a lot in negotiation to overcome difficulties and to overcome constrained situations. And the last 7-8 years now, I've been first 5 years in the executive team of Valeo in France, expanding, making Valeo more global. And very recently now I joined MOBIS, the Korean affiliate of Hyundai Group, focusing on parts and helping them to become more independent, more international, and more outspoken to the world of international OEMs.
Okay, perfect. So as you just mentioned there, a number of different leading businesses, leading functions where you've had your hand in transforming organizations from different areas. So if we go back, as you mentioned, obviously starting out within Daimler, but then moving into Bosch. So tell us a little bit about your experiences in Bosch and kind of some of the achievements you made there.
It actually was very interesting. So it was initially not planned to join Bosch. So I moved from Daimler to Booz Allen at a time when just before Daimler Chrysler was announced. I felt a little bit, okay, my career needs a little more boost. And then in Booz Allen, I had the chance to really work on basically 3 years on the truck industry and Volvo NOVI truck merger. And this opened up to see the world more than just passenger cars. And somehow Bosch came across me, and so I was introduced, interviewed, and Bosch made a great job in terms of attracting me to join the diesel entity when I became head of Renault and Nissan. Thanks to my French background, my French language skills, I took over Renault and Nissan as an account. And the diesel was the second biggest Commonwealth account. And why do I make this tour? Because I was hired because I was the one who came from Daimler. But I was successful because I was consultant. And having been consultant and being knowledgeable in France, in French, I could handle the teams. And this were the first time teams were structured internationally. Rather than having, Germany, Peugeot, Renault, and then France, Peugeot, Renault, and then Nissan and others in Japan, we had to introduce global customer teams. So I was in charge for teams sitting in Stuttgart, sitting in France, sitting in Japan, and ultimately also in Korea for Renault Samsung. And this made a major boost, but you need to be very customer oriented and very internationally minded to make this work. And you need to feel, in automotive supplier, the OEM is pretty dominant and the supplier is more like in a service position. So at the end, you need to feel like, what are the limits? When is the customer demands are reasonable and just the organization is stubborn? And when the customer demands are just unreasonable and you have to push them back. And to get this navigation right, to get this is something you need to have intuitively in your heart, in your internal radar. Who is right when? And this is consulting was a great training for this, to push the teams to the limit, but not beyond. No?
Yeah.
To say to the customer, look, this is reasonable. I can do this. I can commit this. And by Friday night, we're going to prepare for Monday morning. We're going to do this. But this is unreasonable. This we will not do, because this is not a realistic demand. And this helped me actually to navigate through a very difficult situation where Renault was about to kick out Bosch on diesel. Okay. Two other suppliers were put into the market with the help of Renault, Siemens at the time, and Delphi. Auto Diesel, first Delphi, today part of Warner. And then suddenly Bosch was facing stiff competition, and I had to fight for market share. That was the time when I came in, and at the end of my tenure, we signed a 10-year delivery contract. And relations were totally turned around, and Catherine Perez was one of my key purchasing interfaces. And just recently, when I'm sitting here in Korea with another former Renault executive from Powertrain, we had nice dinner. He's now in Hyundai. I'm here in MOBIS. And then we had Catherine on the phone. It was pretty, after so many years, more than 20 years almost. So this was marking experience. Marking achievements was a deep turnaround of the relation, building in new trust, building new performance, and then signing finally a new long-term contract.
Okay, and how did you go about, or how do you go about kind of restoring the trust, the relationship, once that seems to be broken between kind of the tier one supplier and the OEM? What's the steps?
I think this is very much the same, and this is identical from Bosch via Conti to Valeo and to MOBIS now. Interesting, when I joined Valeo and then I had my first customer meetings the first 4 or 5 months, many of the customers said, please make Valeo like Bosch. So Bosch is in many ways the benchmark, how to be customer oriented. And this has to do with listening to the customer. And now, in Bosch, I came in from consultancy. So consultants, you need to listen exactly what the customer wants, and you need to deliver. And there are no limit. Whatever it takes, you never fall short of a delivery. And this attitude, I think, it's very important for suppliers as well. Now, in Bosch, we had the attitude, and that was, I think, remarkably different, and that's why Bosch is so much liked. Bosch is a foundation, another listed company, and Bosch always thinks about, I'm in charge. I'm in charge to not stop your line. I will always deliver, whatever it takes. And if it takes a helicopter, it takes a helicopter. I will always deliver, and I feel part of responsibility. If my system doesn't work, I do not make finger pointing. Yeah, but I did only this, and the other one did this, and this is his fault. No. We say, look, our part are part of a system. And when the system doesn't work, we feel we have a shared responsibility that the system ultimately did not make what it was intended to do. Of course, now I speak from diesel systems, so there are more commodity-oriented businesses where also Bosch might be different. But at the time, this was marking thinking, and I have always been a systems guy. Yeah. I feel responsible to what I deliver. I'm responsible if it doesn't work. And at the end, the customer can rely on me. And then another key element of Bosch, and this is what I'm trying to train the MOBIS teams now, is we had a holistic customer interface. The only one interface where everything went was me. All Renault, Nissan topics went over my desk, whether it's in Japan or in France, whether it's in Korea or anywhere. It went through my desk and my team's desks. This means whether it was innovation, whether it was R&D collaboration, whether it was resources, whether it was, of course, RFQs and pricing, and then getting the project ready, whether it was project reviews, project performance, or quality in the field. We were in charge. If the customer has a complaint, he calls me up, and he can call me up basically 24/7. And this made, of course, endless travels. My teams were traveling from France to Germany, and from Japan to Stuttgart, and from France, whatever. But we are always on the flight, always there. But my people were in charge. My people were in charge of either sales or project development or quality or service or pricing or samples, whatever it is. I was a clear face. And the customer knew, and I have a problem, I call this guy or this lady up, and they will solve it. And this attitude is something where others are struggling to live up to, because they have silos, because they have a more traditional organization, because they have cut the responsibility different. And at the end of all days, Bosch, while it's heavy and has many disadvantages we don't want to discuss here, but this customer interface, this makes the difference. And this makes that at the end, Bosch is so successful and Bosch is number one in the market. And I'm not sure if Bosch is like this today. I would not commend it. It's many years back I left, but this is what I learned from these 7-8 years I was there. And that's what I have in my backpack when I go somewhere. That customer orientation, this is the way how I live it and how I interpret it.
Okay, so the customer always comes first, and do everything you can to please the customer and ensure they
absolutely
are happy. No, not a problem.
And we provide a product, but also a service to the customer. That's must never forget. It's a product and a service. No?
Okay, and then as you mentioned there, Germany, France, but then you took up the position over in India for Bosch.
Yeah, that's right. Then there's some few opportunities when you are customer team leaders. It's a few opportunities when you become really entrepreneur. So I had a chance to go to India and become really entrepreneur, my own plant, my full organization, sales, of course, but also R&D, finance, HR, purchasing. And then we were producing our own products in our own site for India and for the South, Middle East, Asia type of region. Yeah, we had a little bit in Iran at the time. It was not forbidden like today. We were expanding out to Thailand because England, India, and Thailand always had some relations. And this was like my region. I was like, let's call it the king of the region. And everything on this was now no longer diesel. This was starter alternators and small motors. And then we tried to make these customers happy in the region, either with European designs, sometimes Chinese designs, or sometimes we even our own. We had the platform homeroom, as you would call it today, the responsibility for low-cost alternators. And where we did it with China and Brazil and developed and put it to production. And many years later, while Valeo is much, much stronger in alternators than Bosch, and very profitable, Bosch not. But many years later, I still lost business against Bosch low-cost alternator that I did 5-10 years earlier when I was in India with my Indian team.
Okay, and what was the main challenges in India? Was it just the cultural differences from what you was used to in France or Germany?
Yeah, just is a small word. It's mainly customer differences. But the cultural differences on two ways. The one the Indian can do, but then they can do everything, and this is not always realistic what they believe they can do. So we need to get a little bit structure and discipline, but they work extremely hard. They're really motivated. You have no problem of not motivating, at least on the staff, on the white collar people. On the blue collar was some challenges in the plant with unions, but on the white collar, no motivation issues. We were working very hard to win, to fight, to get it right. But on the other hand, you also had like German platform principles that are extremely beautiful for global platforms, but unfortunately no use in India. So Tata Nano now at the end was not a big success, but we didn't know this at the time. We thought it's going to be a breakthrough like Dacia Logan. So we made then Tata Nano profitable. Tata Nano profitable starter, profitable alternators. But you would not do this by getting oversized German luxury alternators and super duper starter motors localized in India. You need to have a local Indian approach. While you still have Bosch quality, but you need to localize the approach, 100% different thinking, adapting to market. And I think this is what is the biggest challenge to overcome, to win your freedom, to make it right. But then when you do it, to not overthrow the basic rules, the values of Bosch. It still needs to be a Bosch product.
Okay, so it's really adapting to where you are at that point.
Exactly.
Instilling those standardized processes.
And India is a great example for many things. If you go to McDonald's, then you see there you get a hamburger. It looks like a hamburger, but there's zero American in there, except the design of the M on the door. Yeah, it's 100% local, and it's a profitable business. And if you buy Kinley water, Coca-Cola brand, there's zero American stuff in there, but it's a profitable business, 100% localized. And this is a role model for many of us in automotive. how to be 100% indigenous, locally connected, sourced, supplied, but still having a global standard and a global quality, value, and a global principle supplied. And this is what we need to live up to. I remember now when we mentioned Catherine Perez, when she was in Nissan already, Carlos Tavares also in Nissan, they came to India and then they put the localization curve on the screen on a Renault Mahindra joint venture plan. Later on it failed, but at the time when we were still euphoric how it would come. And they put simply on the flag that we're going to localize 90%. We all, what, impossible? Yeah, of course, but it is possible. You can localize 90 and more % in China, in India, wherever. It's just to take an effort and to rethink certain of your aspects, what you do.
Okay. And then when we look at obviously other businesses, if we touch on your time at Conti now, obviously Bosch, Conti's never so far behind them. If you're looking at the automotive suppliers list, usually we're looking at those guys being 1 and 2. So how is it leaving Bosch, then joining a business or a competitor such as Conti?
Yeah, well, at the end, Bosch sold the alternator business and the starter business, and then I was a little bit like left over in India. I had to go back early. Yeah, and then the options were not what I would have expected, having now put my family all 2 years to India. So then at the time, when Continental acquired VDO, this was an opportunity. And basically I moved from India straight to finally Conti VDO. I started with Siemens, but I became a Conti VDO employee. And this was a great experience, then the Siemens guys, well, they're finally somebody who understands automotive, because these Conti guys, these were, tire bakers, from Hanover. It's bizarre. But the Conti guys felt like, that's good because he thinks like us. And that's right, yeah. The Siemens guy, they were from such a bureaucratic organization. They were not customer-oriented in the way I described what Bosch was bringing. But somehow it was like Southern German accepting, Bosch, Siemens, it's similar. And so I was building the bridge between the two different cultures. The more continental culture, automotive supplier, we adapt to customers. When there's a crisis, the CEO goes there himself and he goes with the team, and we stand straight and deliver and resolve the problem. Where on the other side, the teams, and they had a huge headcount, 12,000 headcount. The teams needed somebody where they believe, okay, he's like us because he's like Southern German and he's automotive and not this guy from the north. Neglecting that in Siemens, they might have actually have a little less automotive service culture. When I mentioned earlier product and service, the service culture was in Siemens not as strong naturally because it's a big industrial conglomerate and not necessarily an automotive supplier by culture. So at the end, it was a rough ride. It was a rough transition, but I think we have been fairly successful. When I left Conti, then the numbers were about to come back to zero. When I started, it was minus 10%, like this, double digit. So it was in a difficult period coming back, and we don't talk about quality and other challenges we had. It was a tough period. So therefore, I feel sad when I see today that Vitesco is restructuring and putting many things at stake that we did at the time.
Yeah. Okay, and so when you're looking at the company being in red numbers, especially double digit, to even get that back to zero or even into green, kind of what is the task? What is it? How do you approach that situation?
At the end, what we did, we put a classical Siemens-based McKinsey-derived cost-cutting program. Where everybody was measured on a net present value contribution of any action. We had stiff targets. We had 2008-9, the crisis that was kicking in, reducing the volumes. And then we adjusted the capacities, the headcounts, the salaries, everything, the company cars, the travel arrangements, everything we cut down to what it was possible. And then it turns out that due to a different industry background, Siemens was quite more, let's say there was more space to take out, more structures to reduce, to come to a continental level. that was basically more lean. And Conti is famous for being more lean. Now, I've learned later that it's by no way as lean as Valeo is lean. So basically from Siemens, almost like Bosch in terms of structures, to Conti, and then to Valeo, there's a big gap in between. But even Valeo, even leaner than Conti, works. And at automotive, every percent counts. Every percent overhead, every percent cost counts. So by taking this down, adjusting, closing plants, I sold one plant in US. I closed one hydraulic plant in Europe, and adjusted many others in capacity. At the end, then when you do this and the people believe in it, then it also works. And we have been lucky also because we won new business from Ford, we won new business from Audi, giving us perspective. So the people, when they saw, okay, good, it's going to be tough, but we see a light at the end of the tunnel, then they also tend to follow. And then we can implement the measures without too much resistance and come through. And at the end, it took 18, 16, 17, 18 months, 15 months, 18 months, like this, until we saw the light at the end of the tunnel. And then also volumes came back towards the end of 2009, early 2010, volumes picked up again. And this wasn't helping to lift it over the threshold.
Okay, I understand. And obviously now, as you mentioned, the Vitesco spin-off is happening, and Conti being more focused on kind of the ADAS side and the autonomous vehicle aspect.
No, of course, we did the diesel and gasoline, and this is now 28, 29, it's 10, 11, 12 years back. Now the world has changed. Now we saw the first hybrid. My colleague Jörg Rotendorst, who's now in Rheinmetall, he was, at the time we had the first S-Class hybrids and the first Renault and A123 and first electrical adventures, but it was in its infancy. Now today it's still in its teenager, you would actually say, teeny, it's not yet fully grown up yet. But at the time it was in its infancy. And from today's perspective, you said, how could you establish gasoline injection, diesel injection? But at the time it was not visible that where we stand in 2020.
Okay. And then obviously from Conti, went back to the customer side and was CPO of Volvo. So obviously a whole different culture, being Swedish now. How did that come about? And what was the new challenges you faced now being responsible for purchasing?
First Conti was ending because then there were some management changes and some leadership changes, and then it ended up in being a slightly different direction than I would have taken. So, and then it was separated. I continued quite a bit with Navistar, having my own company I mentioned before, setting up this and work with Navistar, work with Alvarez, with ThyssenKrupp and others. Having a great period, and that's about the time when I met Stefan Jacobi, then head of Volvo, just appointed, and about to carve out Volvo from Ford.
Okay.
And then we got initially a consulting arrangement, and we got into discussion and more, and then after, it took quite some months of back and forth and discussing, and then finally they asked, but would you also do this with a business card? I said, yes, of course. If the reporting is right, I would love to do this. And then I ended up in joining Volvo as head of purchasing, basically with one message. I know suppliers. I've been in Bosch and in Conti. I've been in various regions. I can help you to be profitable in a situation where you come out of a family of 6 million vehicles at the time. Now you have 400,000 vehicles. What do the large suppliers do? They tend to come back and say, look, this is now the old price. The new price it's much higher. But Volvo wasn't so profitable. So actually you cannot afford to pay more. You need to pay less. So how to turn this? And this is, I think, the exercise in Sweden, how to turn this around, how to make sure that while suppliers have their right and they have to come back and ask for more price for the same parts, how to turn this in terms of getting their ideas to the table and say, look, I understand your logic, but please understand our logic. We cannot pay more, we need to pay less. So how do we get to pay less? And then we had a huge program in terms of reducing vehicle cost, reducing unnecessary content, and jointly with engineering, Peter Mertens at the time, jointly with controlling, we questioned about everything. We questioned contracts, we questioned content, we questioned part, we questioned paintings. We put everything in on the shelf. Some things maintained because it's still a Volvo, maybe more Volvo than it was, but some other things we just took out. And then asked suppliers to become more profitable. Some didn't want to, and then I went to China for glass, for rear seat entertainment, for other things. And I have to say, I did a lot. This helps me now for today. I did a lot with Asian suppliers in China, in Korea, and in Japan. Volvo today, at least the Spa platform, is full of Japanese content from Denso, from Alps, from Melco, from Yasaki, you name it. I think the whole Japanese font is there, but also batteries from LG Chem and Chinese, I just mentioned. So when then European suppliers were not able or was not possible to find an arrangement, then we found other solutions. And today we can say Volvo has not suffered any quality constraints. Volvo has not had any setbacks from that, but it's by far a more competitive, better, more attractive vehicle than it has been. And I think that is what we can say purchasing can contribute, but important never alone. Purchasing always hand in hand with engineering, with controlling. It's a joint effort because it's a vehicle is a team effort. It's not an individual effort.
Okay, Axel, I've read previously when we're talking about, I think it was a VW aspect that I read previously in terms of negotiation from the tier one to the customer and kind of some tricks that are played. For instance, making boardrooms extremely hot, leaving people in there for some time. Was there anything that you have known of or heard of in automotive that's tipped the negotiation one way or the other?
Oh, no, say it again that I get the question right.
I read something about a negotiation that happened in VW. I can't remember the tier one supplier that was negotiating with them, but VW in the boardroom made it extremely hot, so they was uncomfortable prior to the negotiation.
Yeah. But this is all these press stories. Volkswagen has been my customer for I don't know how many years, 15, 20, I don't know. I always like to work with Volkswagen because Volkswagen is straight, Volkswagen is clear, Volkswagen is fair, Volkswagen is demanding, but they do not put the knife in your back when you turn around.
Yeah.
That's very important. So while they are extremely demanding, you can also rely on the word of basically everyone there. When they promise, if you do this, I do that, then if you do, they also do. And then therefore I understand what they were reading, but there's a few rules in this industry. We need to understand, we need to accept that also the OEM, and I've seen this in Volvo, we are also in a sandwich position. We are in a sandwich position. If we push too much vehicles to the market, it's like on the food market on the weekend. If you too much apples by 12 o'clock, the market closing, then the apples are gone. So basically you make a discount at the end of 12 o'clock. And the same is with vehicles. You cannot push too much vehicles, transaction price goes down. So you need to adjust your production, number one, and you need to accept that by the time you come, your vehicle is fresh and new. 1 year later, somebody else comes with a fresher and newer vehicle. So what you do, you need to put some stuff in the vehicle to make it nicer. Some leather, some chrome, some bling bling, some blah blah. At the end, it's about 2-3% extra. So you don't put the price down, you put more content in the car. So after a year and 2 years and 3 years, it's still attractive. And these 2 or 3%, we cannot just expect that an OEM takes them on its own. If we as a supplier, we are 2/3, 3/4 of the value. If we as a supplier community altogether do not play this game, if we refuse to concede any 2 or 3% requests to the OEM model wouldn't work. And we see in many of the OEMs, especially in the volume segment, do not make much margin. Most of the suppliers are more profitable now I talk pre-COVID, before crisis kicked in 2017, 18, 19. Good suppliers have 8, 9, 10% margin. Let's say 8+%. In average, automobile also has 8% margin, but there are two fronts. These are the volume makers, 2-3%, and there are the premium makers, 10+. Toyota is the exception. Toyota is the only volume maker who makes 10+%. But in average, let's say they're also around 8. In 3 years, going 3% down, this would be gone if suppliers would not follow. Therefore, suppliers have to follow to make this system work. Some suppliers try to somehow circumvent this and believe, when I define very hard, then somebody else has to give 4% and I come out clean.
Yeah.
But this doesn't work. Yeah. And that's was a little bit what I'm afraid that some people played a little bit in the press, maybe smart, maybe also finger pointing intelligently. But at the end, we are all in one business. And we are all in the business. And if I go like this to the public, that's not a solution. I'm supposed to build parts in plants to make vehicles, good vehicles, and to make an effort to deliver good quality, good quantity at a defined price and terms, and not go to the press and make any announcement, pressure type of thing. This is not my business. Selling a vehicle and making noise is the OEM's business.
Yeah.
And I think this is very important. And then some people who try it differently, then ultimately I'm not surprised they disappear. And there has been many cases, not just the case you mentioned. There's been many other cases in the past. This type of business behavior sometimes pops up, but it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
I'm a supporter and a defender of a sustainable business model, a long-term relationships, and a partnership model on both sides, on the OEM and on the supplier side.
Okay.
And frankly, I feel that over years, sorry that I need to adjust it because it was really shocking when I read the news there, not knowing everything is true or not. But over years, OEMs have become more partnership oriented. I'm seeing this for now 20 plus years, almost 30 years. The partnership thinking has dramatically changed. It's much more collaborative than it has been. And when you come as a supplier and you do have a problem, there are very few OEMs who say, you know what, go home, solve your problem. If you're bankrupt, I don't care. All of the OEMs that I know, but I happen to work for large suppliers. I agree that for smaller ones, it might be different. Somebody with replaceable products. But if you are one of these large groups, nobody lets you down. And in the crisis in Continental, nobody let us down. OEMs accepted a lot of mess just to keep us alive. No? And this is the attitude I would be standing for.
Okay, so it's a partnership that needs to carry on.
Exactly.
And then from there, went into Vallejo at group level for sales. How was that now? Again, another new culture. Back into the sales arena where you was very strong.
No, it wasn't that new actually for me. I talked 5 times to Vallejo in my life. Already in Bosch, I was supposed to become head of compressors, which was the then Bosch Vallejo joint venture. Now it didn't turn out like this. Later on, when I went then to Continental, I talked to Vallejo. It didn't fly, so I went to Conti. But good discussions. Then when I went to Volvo, I was discussion with Vallejo, I think twice even. Again, it did not really, it was good discussion, but somehow it did not conclude. And then when I was in Vallejo, I gave a lot of business to, in Volvo, I gave a lot of business to Vallejo. All the lamps, quite some of the switches and so on. And a Volvo XC90 is a pretty high Vallejo content, very high Vallejo content. And the good image about Vallejo as a partner, as a good supplier for me. And then Vallejo approached me when he said, you have been so often here. Now you come, now you take my job, no? Because I'm going to go for retirement. And that was at a moment when Volvo was reorganizing, restructuring, and purchasing was downgraded a little bit, which I would not wanted to accept. And then I said, you know what, now I know this Vallejo I speak French, I mentioned this, I was in France, I talked to Vallejo, and now I know them as a supplier. Look, that's going to be exciting for me. And it was a huge job, sitting in the C-suite and being in charge of all customers in the world and all regions in the world, all regional presidents. I think was a sizable task. Maybe even bigger than Volvo's task. Even as maybe the reputation is not like an OEM, but the content was actually more demanding. So I had a very good period, 5 years in Vallejo, really doubling the order intake, getting Vallejo introduced to almost all OEMs in the world, and many famous vehicles. You would not imagine. Now there's probably not many cars without Vallejo content. No? Including electric and autonomous and all the new technologies we were able to produce and to introduce.
Okay. And what were the main challenges you faced stepping into that role within Vallejo?
Yeah, of course, it's a French company, and coming in from Sweden, a culture of very much consensus finding, where you, as a leader, are more expected to orchestrate the team. The team actually does the work, and consensus is absolute must. Now coming to a French culture, where then the boss is supposed to decide on his own, not involving everybody, and having clear direction, and then the team would then execute. Also, it's of course a personal challenge, because you cannot just ask the team, "Oh, how would I do this now? What do they think? How can we find consensus?" It's not so important. They say, "What do you decide?" So this is definitely a big shift. Not so big, take from France to Korea, but it was a big shift for me. It was a challenging shift.
Mm-hmm.
It was good coming back to suppliers after the 2.5 years on purchasing side. I think I'm more on the supplier guy, more an industry guy than the marketing in terms of selling vehicles. It's maybe not my home turf. Selling B2B is definitely where I come from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then it's great to have all OEMs around the world. I have all the broad range of technology. This was good. And with the French culture, benefiting from my French language was quite helpful. Challenging was that French language and French company is not the same thing.
Okay.
So then being in a French organization, adaptation, and this was sometimes more difficult, sometimes less difficult. But at the end, I had great freedom. I could travel around the world when I wanted. I had enormous travel miles pre-COVID, flying every week sometimes, and trying to get customers happy.
Okay, and what would you say? Obviously, you've worked for some of the biggest tier ones globally in terms of Bosch, Conti, Valeo. What would you say the key differences are between the three businesses?
I think that is at the end, from helicopter, it's all the same. You will not become top 10 when you are not adhere to certain rules. And I was proud that I could guide Valeo, accompany Valeo to become a top 10 supplier, which means you are perceived as partner. You are considered for all RFQs. You have sometimes to do an RFQ you don't like, because as a partner, you also do the niche models that are maybe less attractive. You are qualified as, for instance, Volkswagen Fast supplier. I was one of the few who won 2 Fast nominations in Volkswagen. So like this, this was in Valeo, it was a challenge to bring them there. In Bosch was the opportunity. They were there. They were naturally number one in the world. They were the biggest, most successful. In diesel, it's their home turf. But then it was no more the challenge how to make them more French. Now, when Bosch was to make more French in terms of more Renault-oriented, and then French-Japanese with Renault and Nissan, now the challenge was to make a French supplier with a strong footprint in Germany, to make them more international and more adapted to, Ford in America, GM, Toyota in Japan, Geely in China, to make them more adept from a French plus, so that's French plus German approach, to a really individual, to adapt to every customer type of thinking. And of course, I don't need to make a French and then German. So this was quite a different challenge. Continental was maybe in between. I said earlier, Valeo is probably the leanest of all players. In Valeo, we always suffered lack of headcount, lack of this and that. My planning team in Valeo was maybe 5 people. In Bosch, just in one division, I had 18 or 23 people just for the same work. And there was, of course, in the group level also that a huge 50, 60 to do this. And in Valeo, we did the same with just 5. We did not intend to make our own volume planning. We just bought them on the market. We accepted that they are wrong. Bosch thinks, I'm so big, it's a value add to make my own planning that is better than any Global Insight, IHS, whatever in the market. And that's right. Everybody invites Bosch to hear the Bosch numbers. They are far better than anything. Just they are not public. But in Valeo, we accept we cannot. So we buy from the market, we save the effort. And that's just a fundamental cultural difference. Conti would be in between those two. A little leaner than Bosch, a little more capital market oriented, but still German with some engineering depth. That is the other side. Now, being very lean, then also engineering depth in Valeo is maybe not as much as in Bosch. Conti still has a substantial engineering depth, maybe more than Valeo here and there, but not yet the research and R&D advanced depth that the Bosch is adding to this one. So like this, all three are individual animals, individual cultures, all have their strengths, all have their reason to be there. And now we're going to apply this to a fourth one who is slightly bigger than Valeo, about 50% more, but not as balanced yet in the world customer portfolio, and to help them to become more globally represented.
Okay, and now moving on to present day, in the MOBIS business, the first non-Korean to sit on the MOBIS executive board. So tell us about this, how the opportunity came around, and kind of the challenges you're going to be facing in your current business.
You know, after when Valeo ended, after basically in the 5th year of my 5th anniversary, then I first went into electric buses. And if there would not have been COVID, I might have stayed there. But then electric buses for communities and regions and cities is going to be very difficult when the buses are empty and the cities are suffering because they are locked down. You don't need a city bus electric when, you know, it's empty and the shops are closed. The coffees are closed. So this was suddenly facing last year, about in March, April, I was suddenly facing a brutal block because, I mean, leaving Valeo, okay, starting a thing, lots of euphoria and this and this and that, and you do here and there, and suddenly you stand there and say, oh shit, this is now not be good there. It's going to be very difficult now. And then there was this actually direct approach via LinkedIn. And then I started the discussion, and over time we became more familiar. And then after 2-3 months, still earlier, and I had a number 11 questions to answer. And when I prepared this question, I said, wow, you know what? This is going to be exciting. This is going to be an exciting exercise. So then I changed the gears. And then I said, look, now I want to have this. No? And then we had, it took long. It was a long process. Because of COVID, everything on video. And of course, it's more difficult. Different culture, different language. How to take such a big decision by electronic only. On both sides.
Yeah.
But at the end, I think I could convey the message that if we do it right, there's a space to win and there's a need to win, and MOBIS brings something to the market nobody else is having. And this experience from a Korean perspective, from an Asian perspective, to hone, to massage, to polish, to make sure it's globally accepted and attractive, that's an extremely exciting task. It's probably the most exciting task I had in my professional career. It's not as big as the Valeo task because the French content, the French business share in France compared to the rest of the world was not so relevant. Here, the Korean content, the Hyundai content is of course huge, and our content, the international one, is still small. But there's a sizable growth, sizable opportunity, and it's an interesting portfolio because here we have actually only future-oriented business. There's no legacy in powertrain, only e-powertrain and fuel cells on one side. It's a classic range of electronics from lighting to navigation to connectivity. Some classics like steering and braking. And no legacy, that's good, number one. And number two, it has half of the business is module. It's again, I mentioned earlier, supplier is service and parts, no? And module is actually an assembly service. That's something I never had in a big scale. So we can actually build cars. I mean, MOBIS can go out there and say, hey, dear, whoever, GM, Ford, Tesla, Daimler, whatever, hey, I can build your car. If you don't have capacity, I do this for you. And that's this unique position and unique challenge because this market ticks a little different from lamps, connectivity, autonomous driving. So actually I have two businesses, a module business, which is totally new for me, and a classical business where I have only future-oriented businesses.
Okay, and I think that shows something that's been huge through this COVID period is a decision so big as that, as bringing on the first non-Korean executive, was all done over video calls, no face-to-face meetings. So I think it just shows how this pandemic is kind of affected
Absolutely. Yeah.
and built trust.
But I don't feel like I'm now this exclusive animal, this foreigner, like here, Captain Spock, being jetted in and so on. Actually, this would not reflect reality. I think the team is pretty open. The team has understood we have a big challenge ahead of us. It's for everyone good. The example here is Toyota and Denso. I was for 6 weeks in Denso in my life on a Bosch exchange program, so I learned Denso more from the inside. And Toyota was very clear, you Denso have to have half of your business outside Toyota. Now half would be, it's a long way from us to go. But the idea is right. If you are competitive in the market, you are a better supplier for me. And this logic applies for us as well. So we want to be competitive in the market because we are a better supplier to the world, including to our mother company. And this is, I think, what we need to have in mind. What can we do? What does it take? And what do we need to do to become a better partner for everybody, for the mother company and for all the others in the market in our defined businesses? And this is something where we need to do a lot of strategy work. My scope is pretty large this time, from planning, from marketing, via sales to really project management, implementation. But it also needs a lot of work. Where do we actually compete? How do we compete? Where do we believe this is our value add? And with which customer we're going to go there, because some customers feel, oh, this Hyundai might be dangerous. Why we have these Chinese firewalls and all the precautions. Some people are still afraid. Others are much more open. No? And this is not just, cultural organization. It's also individuals. Some feel more scared, others not. But I'm here because we do have a separate division, standalone entity to make this happen. We are not everything leaking through and the longer arm of the Hyundai teams. That's very important to build the trust, to create the trust, and to ensure that we want to be your partner, whether it's Daimler or GM, whether it's Stellantis or Nissan. We're going to be your partner. We want to do first business for you, but you benefit from a scale that is shared, of course, with some 5, 6, 7 million vehicles that is produced for our Korean family owner.
So, Axel, we've been talking about the MOBIS business and kind of you being there, the first non-Korean to sit on their board. But what's your task within MOBIS now?
So MOBIS is well understood that, and Hyundai has understood that if MOBIS is too much depending on Hyundai business, it would actually, if it's not competitive to other customers outside Hyundai, or ultimately it would actually become a weak supplier even for Hyundai, which is a risk for not only MOBIS but for the whole group. So therefore the strategy is to develop Hyundai business outside to make sure it's always competitive in the market. Because if it's competitive products with other customers, it's also competitive products with Hyundai. So based on this strategy, based on this understanding, the strategy is to actually substantially grow the business of global OE outside Hyundai. And therefore, the new division has been created that I'm allowed to lead, which objective is to substantially enhance and multiply the business of non-Hyundai automotive customers. And a separate division is needed to actually guarantee a certain confidentiality, a certain ability to individually adapt to the needs of each and every OEM in the world, to be like any other supplier, being ready to adapt to the needs of the big OEM brand names and the small startup brand names wherever they are in the world, and to use this to accelerate our business share all the way to 1/3, 1/2 of the total business.
Okay. And will the entrance points be within Asia, or you focus on getting into Europe, US first? How is that going to look?
So for the time being, I have 4 big regions, which is China, Japan, Europe, and US, whereas the dominant part of automotive OEMs is located. And there's actually no specific preference. We are pretty strong in US, which is more than half of the non-Hyundai captive business. And we are relatively weaker in Europe, China, and in Japan. Now, it's important. China itself is not, it's of course a target by itself for the Chinese OEMs, but big part of Chinese market is joint venture markets. And these joint venture markets are best served when you first enter business in their home countries. This means for the American joint ventures in US, now this is pretty much on the way. But for the European joint ventures, meaning Volkswagen, Daimler, BMW, you have to first enter business into Europe before you can be eligible for the business in China. So actually, China then automatically becomes another priority. I wouldn't say second priority, that's negative. China is highest priority, but you need to make the duties. The duties is to start winning business in US, in Europe, and in Japan in order to be eligible also for business in China. And this is probably half, simplified, half of the Chinese market is coming through joint ventures. So therefore, my priority now, as US is pretty strong, is Europe and Japan to enter the big OEMs there, and then of course in the second step also benefit in the China opportunities.
Okay, I understand. And then, Axel, coming on to a subject I know that you like to discuss and you feel strongly about is new technologies. We've come from the diesel and gasoline engine. We're now into the electric vehicle and coming into a hydrogen phase, maybe. So, what's your viewpoint on that, on these technologies?
I think it's actually pretty much the strength of MOBIS. MOBIS has no legacy business in terms of combustion engine powertrain, but has the full suite of technologies both for electric and for fuel cell propulsion, as well as from ADAS to parking to electronics. So therefore, this is also the areas which are growing faster. And electronics would include lighting, because lighting is LEDs, electronics. So these are the areas that grow relatively faster and that are also relatively easier to access, because if it's a growing market, there's space for new suppliers. Of course, we also do steering and braking, but here we have to fight against incumbents. And as the market is more stable, if not going down, then of course it's always a price positioning. So hence it's more easy and more successful at the moment to focus on the new and the growth technologies, where we have to say, MOBIS is in production. Where some others still have PowerPoint, we do produce hundreds of thousands of Hyundai electric vehicles, fuel cell vehicles, and so on. And therefore also customers are pretty much interested to get these technologies analyzed and contracted first. Same with electronics. We have a number of high innovative things, from active road noise cancellation to holographic head-up displays, from advanced ADAS, parking, LiDAR, and ultrasonic technologies, radar included. All this is, of course, there's growth, there's more potential to come in and to play a substantial role, and of course benefit from the scale advantage we have through Hyundai.
Okay. And then in your personal opinion, what's your viewpoint on full electric vehicles and the future of, say, automotive manufacturing in general?
Yeah, that's, I think, this is one of the major shifts that is happening in this industry. And it needs the move towards electric in order to unleash the potential of a new automobile design. Today's automobiles are basically designed with an engine somewhat in front, rear engines, especially Porsche and Volkswagen Beetle, they are long gone. So the key is now having engines front, and you have then some passenger compartment and rear wheel or front wheel drive. Now, electric actually opens up totally new opportunities, because thanks to the skateboard of thinking, when we take a Lego example from when we are playing with as a small boys, we put this ground plate and then we actually click in the wheels on the bottom and build some nice bodies on the top. And when you take this plate and say, this is my battery pack, my battery pack is my plate, and I click in the wheels on front and on the rear, and then I create some fantastic new body shape, then you can imagine that this skateboard design is actually serving many different vehicle applications. But it requires first to become electric, to then go to a standardized architecture where then the motor is relatively small, but the battery pack is the central part. And this type of skateboard thinking and skateboard design will be a revolution to automobile technology, because all current manufacturing that is done on integrated body, where you attach an engine in front and then start from there with big robots, welding, body in white, painting, and then assembling, will be replaced by a basic skateboard, flat 20 centimeter high type of base plate, where you then can create a number of different body shapes to a number of different purposes. And you see this in Volkswagen best, because in Volkswagen, when they started up the first MEB, they said, okay, we're going to have 20, 25 vehicles on it. No? Now, a normal platform typically has 10, 12 models. So they already doubled from the classic powertrain platform in ICE eras on the electric skateboard approach, already doubled it. But today, now, they first doubled it up to 50. And now with the addition of Ford, using the same skateboard, there more than 80 vehicles will be off the same skateboard platform. And it's not just Volkswagen who drives this. Similarly, Hyundai is driving this. Geely announced it on the end of September. They're going to be part of this. Probably Peugeot Stellantis is doing it the same approach, being one of the most cost competitive and most attractive and aggressive platforms that are available. So soon, any smaller OEM will ask himself, do I need to develop my own skateboard, or do I rather buy a skateboard from Volkswagen, Geely, Hyundai, or any other manufacturer? It's so much cheaper because all the engineering, validation, everything has been done, and I just focus on getting a nice body design. And this will actually revolutionize, because the classic approach, I spent 3 billion into my manufacturing, 1 billion for body in white, 1 billion for painting, 1 billion in assembly, becomes a situation where suddenly you have only the assembly to be done, because the skateboard you can source from really mass-produced platforms, skateboards, from, I wouldn't say a competitor, but from skateboard produced specialists, whether it's Volkswagen, Hyundai, Peugeot, Geely, whoever. And this is going to be the major revolution. Canoe, who is also very fancy on this one, has already said that just the assembly alone gets 30% cheaper. We haven't done the other economies of scale. Just the assembly alone gets 30% cheaper by using platforms, skateboard platforms. Now, on top, you have the synergies on using the skateboard across up to 80 different models. So you see how much potential of really revolutionizing current way of integral body design into skateboards is actually producing. And the most latest, and that's why I would like to highlight, is Arrival. Arrival in UK, that has been contracted by UPS for electric delivery vans, 10, 12, 15,000 different delivery vans paid by Arrival. Arrival says on their website straight on, we have no plant. And this is exactly the point. We have no plant. There's no manufacturing plant of Arrival. Arrival just makes the platform, the skateboard. Mm-hmm. And then UPS makes a UPS truck out of it. And somebody else makes a different truck, and somebody makes maybe a bus or a delivery or another type of vehicle of it. And there's no more vehicle plant needed. And this is actually a real evolution. Once you think in skateboards, of course you need to produce the skateboards, but outside the skateboards, the classic manufacturing plant might be under pressure, if not disappear. So you are no longer having, to take the example now of Detroit or Wolfsburg or Yokohama, you no longer need a big body plant to make millions of the same type of vehicle. Millions of parts are shipped to this central manufacturing scale, and just to produce millions of identical red, blue, silver, green, and other colored type of vehicles to ship them out to dealers to sell them. But you actually decentralize the assembly itself by just focusing on platforms where you build some creative body styles on it. And this, I think, will be a major revolution. This will not be a revolution in the 20s. In the 20s, we're going to go forward, and everybody over the years of 2020 will learn that you have dedicated electric platform. Then they will learn, oh, it's better to have a standardized battery case and attach my wheels as described. And then during the 30s, we will realize, oh, but then if we do this, then my classic plant will no longer be necessary. And then the industry by end of 2030s will be looking quite different from the industry we know today.
Okay. And in your opinion, do you see there being specific suppliers that will pioneer this and really run away with this, rather than there's going to be some suppliers that will kind of catch on later on once they see the results?
No, definitely. There are some suppliers who are early up in identifying this opportunity and trying to be part of it. And this has been all led by, of course, MOBIS want to be integral part of it. But Magna was probably one of the first ones to start up with it when they have their Magna Steyr contract manufacturing approach. And this is the first thing. I don't manufacture my car myself. I actually go to Magna Steyr and they do it for me. Now, this type of tier 0.5 positioning. So I'm not a tier 1 anymore providing components, but I'm actually helping to build full vehicle-based skateboards. For others, I would call it tier 0.5 type of technology. It can be, of course, by manufacturers themselves, like Volkswagen, Peugeot, Geely, I mentioned, but then still somebody else would be the OEM because they make the body shape. So then some OEMs today fight for this tier 0.5 position, as well as MOBIS, Magna, and some others, Valmet, and so on, because we can develop and produce fully functional platforms in terms of skateboard platform to leave others to then make the body out of it. A situation that looks now revolutionary, but at the end, we've seen this in other industry. We've seen this in computers. We've seen this in railroads, in locomotives, and we've seen this in trucks. It's still very much the case. You have a chassis and an engine and a gearbox, but the bus is actually built by bodybuilders.
Mm-hmm.
And this actually something has always been around, but it has not been a mass-produced passenger car approach. It has been on a niche of buses. And I think it's going to be much more widespread as we talk about the 2030s.
No, exactly as you mentioned regarding the locomotive aspect, that was something that happened over a shorter period of time. And as you've mentioned previously, there is not these steam trains left anymore. It is the skateboard, the body,
exactly,
etc.
Yeah, and it took only 20 years, and all steam locos were disappeared. And this is exactly what I see. This integral body design has been great for about 100 years. It was a great revolution once we moved from chassis to integral bodies. But now this might come to an end, replaced by, again, a chassis approach. But the chassis is going to be different from the one in the early part of the 20th century, because now it has the battery, the drive, the wheels, everything is ready to use. And you just then can focus on a creative body, depending on needs, which allows much more variety, much more niche models, and much more decentralized local assembly all the way to 3D printing.
Okay. And Axel, one thing I did want to ask as well is we've seen what you've achieved, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, that the first non-Korean board member, you've worked in leading roles, not just within the tier 1 space, in the OEM space. So what's your advice for somebody either just getting into the industry that wants to be able to advance to where you have, or even somebody in the industry right now that wants to or has the aspirations to do what you've done?
Now, of course, one are the players, the other one are the people. Let's take the players first. I think the key is embrace the change, make the best out of it, and focus on the new world rather than trying to defend the world in the old world. Because if you defend your world in the old world with presumably declining volumes, and I would not predict now how quick and how fast this decline, but it's going to be difficult to see huge growth in the old world. So automatically we will have a price fight, and it's very hard for a newcomer to make a point. If you focus on the new world, there are going to be growth, opportunities, and space for learning. So therefore, clear advice is focus on the new world early up. try to embrace the change earlier. Now, for candidates, for individuals who go in there, it's relatively similar. It's about understanding, that's very important, but then also joining forces with companies who take this on positively, who try to drive the change in this case, and being part of this driving team, to rather join Tesla than join a classic manufacturer who is stuck in his old plants. Because all those who have this huge legacy have a hard time to explain to their shareholders that for years we ditched in the billions into the beton and the concrete of my big plant, and now I somehow don't know how to get rid of it. So if you are entering this type of roles, then you are defending the ending story. But rather go to a new story. Yeah? It's much more fun. I wouldn't say go to a startup. Many of the big OEMs have understood this and they are now pushing extremely forward. But then if you go to a classic OEM, try to get into the new era, into the era of electric and autonomous vehicles, where they start rethinking the future rather than defending the past.
Okay. And then throughout your career, then who would you say have been either your most inspiring leaders or potentially even most inspiring colleagues that you've worked alongside?
Obviously, the leader and the boss is of utmost importance, and you work for your boss. And if these are inspiring leaders looking forward, then you try to emulate them and to take the message forward and to multiply the message and to share their success, which is their success. The leader's success is that you are underneath and trying to share their success by following them and trying to engage more people. So it's actually a reinforcing cycle. I would think three leaders have been standing out in a sequential thing. There was, of course, Volker Stauch, one of my first great leaders in Daimler in the 90s, even when I joined him as a young team leader and we tried to make service innovation. He gave me great freedom, he inspired, and he allowed me to really test new grounds in order to revolutionize the way how to make customers loyal to our workshop network. And the same attitude, the same character, same capability, the same way of leadership, I always appreciated. And many years later, I found it back when then I worked for Continental. And we had a great leader, Karl Thomas Neumann, who is now also on the board of MOBIS. By the time he was CEO of Continental, later on CEO of Opel. And during the times of Continental, we really turned the business around. We actually put this up on new grounds. We integrated this video, made it positive, made it reduce the losses and invest into new products and new plans and new projects. And many customers from Volkswagen, Audi to Ford to others appreciated this because it was important to have a second or third big powertrain player in the market. And earlier, we were focusing on electric mobility in 2008, 9, 10 already. And then much later, I think very important for me was also Stefan Jacobi, leader of Volvo, when we carved it out of Ford and put it as a central member of the Geely family. And this was a great period when we had to reestablish the competencies, the savoir-faire, the know-how, and the resources also to put us on our own feet, but not only as an own feet, on our own feet, Volvo alone, but also Volvo as the central pillar of a Geely auto, where also then Geely needed the Volvo technologies to become successful. And when you see Geely Auto today, how strong they are in China, in Sweden, in Europe, everywhere in the world, then I think this is a great success story where the foundation was laid in time when Stefan was the leader. And I was happy to work for him, as well as I was happy to work for Karl Thomas or for Volker early up in my career. These are leaders that for me stand out by far.
Okay. And Axel, one question I always ask to finish the conversation is, what do you want Axel Maschka's legacy to look like?
I think for me it's important. I grew up in B2B sales. Way before I started automotive, my parents had a B2B sales company and shop floor automation. I learned this way up when I was 10, 12 years old in a small, medium-sized company, when the company is part of dinner and lunch discussions with dad, with mom, every day, always. It's always there. No? And based on this, I learned customer orientation, make the specific focus on understanding customer needs and deliver ultimate better service, better quality, better reactivity, better response. And this makes you a loyal supplier, and the customer is very proud that you are supplying them. And this is actually, this is a infinite truth. This is truth. It is never changing. No? It's the attitude to make it right. And to apply this now to large OEM suppliers, whether it was now Valeo or Bosch at the time, or now MOBIS, and to make sure we establish us as a partner to the large OEMs to accompany them on their journey. And we are the preferred partner compared to others. This is what I want to leave. And now here in MOBIS, bring MOBIS therefore going to new heights and new dimensions by adhering to these basic values. And I want to be the one who is the B2B sales leader who positioned, in this case, MOBIS as the right partner for many OEMs around the world. And then the growth and the success is actually a consequence of putting the right fundamentals in the beginning.
Okay, no, I understand. And Axel, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, a pleasure understanding regarding your background and what you're still left to achieve. So I want to thank you for coming on, and I look forward to our next conversation, Axel.
Hey, Taylor, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this interview and for the discussion. I'm looking forward to stay in touch and hopefully meet in person very soon.
Exactly. Once this COVID situation clears up, we'll definitely meet, Axel.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that, Taylor.
Have a great day.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Bye-bye.